It is live.
See if I can get mine running here. Can you see that? Very good. All right, so JSON, Parse, and Stringify. CIT 261, Mark Morley's presentation. Obviously, you know who I am. So what is JSON? JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's considered to be a lightweight data interchange format. It's basically a subset of JavaScript that's known as Java literals and uses Java literals, if you can understand what those two mean, because it uses other languages, but it's based off the Java, again, subset. It's as you'll see in the next presentation, it's used a lot with AJAX as a form of replacement for XML. And then JSON can be parsed with any modern language. And at the end of my presentation, I show a list of a bunch of those too. So what is it? So I give a little scenario. Let's say you have written some code that needs to be sent over the network. And now you think about it, you realize it may need some sort of code to read or run that other code you've written. And then you think about it some more, and during development, you know, day after day, you add and change properties, you remove some things, add new things and objects, and the complexity of the project changes with nested objects within those properties. And so you think, well, now what? Well, that is what JSON is for. It's basically so that you can transfer and interchange data over a network in a simple form, and basically in a text format that can be converted back into whatever data you're trying to pass along. So JSON Stringify is a general format to represent values and objects, and JSON converts a JavaScript function into a string, making it an excellent choice for data exchange. JSON Parse converts a JavaScript object notation into a JavaScript object. And it does this with a variety of data types. Numbers, which are integers or floats, you know, they're considered to be the same thing within JSON. Strings, an important fact is they always have to be wrapped in double quotes. Boolean is true or false. Arrays or order lists, again, they have to be wrapped in square brackets, and I believe quotes as well when use the parse. And then child objects, unordered key pairs, and multi-tiered objects or nested objects, and then null, the empty value. So what are some of the rules for JSON? It uses key value pairs, for example, name and Marco. So name is the key, Marco is the value, and it must have double quotes within the curly braces. And then it must also follow the specific data types from the previous screen. So it can be, from what I understand, it's super easy to understand, super easy to write, but it's pretty picky on how you put that in there. And so when you're using that data file, it obviously has to be a .json file, and you have to know that it's only a JSON file. You're calling that from some other code, calling that file into your code, either parsing it out as a string or parsing it back out as an object. And it usually needs in that code needs to be loaded, have the load JSON call to call that file from wherever you have it stored. And one other important thing is JSON, unlike JavaScript, doesn't like trailing commas. So then this next slide basically shows what trailing commas are. The last comma in the string or the array, or however whatever you're using. So here's some script. var object, you know, name, the key value name John, age is 30, city is New York. My JSON, I'm gonna stringify it back out to the object, or stringify the object and then call it, and it basically leaves you with that string. So it changes that key value and the name out to a string, a simple text, right? So parse is basically the same thing, except for you're taking that string and you're putting it back into an object. And I'm sure, Micah, in your next presentation, you'll probably talk about what was it, the reviver and the replacer, how to call it out before you use it and stuff. I'm sure that's probably something you'll touch on too, right? So some data type examples. This is just an example of some code of how it would look using the different data types. So name, Marco Roeto, is a string. Age, 35, is a number. And if you'll notice, it doesn't have any quotes. So numbers and floats don't need, or integers and floats don't need quotes. And then an address with a nested object of, the street and the city. Children would be an array, so Grace and Tier and so on and so forth become the array, and each element in the array becomes an object when you parse it out. So what is it used for? So like in the previous screen, I mean, it's kind of obvious that data forms, form fill, stuff like that is very popular. So you have export and import data, where you're exchanging it from using the same data all over in several aspects of some program or some code you're using. Configuration settings, such as scripting, and setting up, like in production, for example, like when I used to work at Micron, we used to use stuff like that so that it would, auto load certain aspects from behind the scenes before it put it on Windows, for example. Attribute mapping files, large amounts of data in a compact and easily accessible location, because it is just a data file. And then API interfacing, which is basically another program. So here's a list of several. I mean, I'm sure this is not all. These are the languages that are used or that use it. And from what I understand, because it's so easy and so simple, that pretty much it's being adapted to every language. And this is not something new too, right? So this came about, I think it was like early 90s, but JSON was already functional before that. Just nobody took the idea and put it into practical terms on paper, or say, hey, this is a language, or hey, this is something we can use to do this either. So it's been around for a while. The grammar, can be translated. Sorry, did someone say something? Anyway, so grammar. So basically, an object is the members of the pairs and the members, string values, so on and so forth. This is basically a cheat sheet card I found on the internet from the guy that actually, he claims he didn't invent JSON, but he was the only one that put it out there and basically capitalized on its use and what it was doing. And then just like HTML and CSS, which I didn't know, there's a validator and a reformatter. So you can go to a website and you can paste in your code and it'll tell you how it should look and if it's valid or not. One exception to that whole thing is that I did learn that JSON has horrible error mapping. It's not very explanatory when you gives errors, so it can be kind of confusing. So all the videos and all the information I gathered, everybody said, be very specific. Take time to put in the attention so your data file is exactly right, because it's so picky. And as it grows, it can be more of a problem than you realize because of how picky it can be within that data file. So use the validator. So anyway, I thought it was interesting, super simple. I had no understanding of JSON previous to this, so it was kind of a cool thing. And I'm actually excited to hear the AJAX portion of this too. So I avoided that like the plague, Micah. So just so you could teach it. Anybody got any questions? Anything to add that I might have missed or need to capitalize better on?
I think you did a great job. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, good job.
Thanks for the research and sharing all of that.
I know, Marco, I see the professor dropped in. I don't know if you had a couple questions for him.
Oh yeah. Is you gonna be on for a bit, Brother James, or are you gonna bail
For
early?
a little while. I thought I'd just drop by here at the
Well,
end of my
good.
day.
Since we need to meet you first of all, anyway. So I did have some questions. So when we're posting code, you said you want an HTML page. You don't like Git pages, but it's acceptable.
Well, if you have a GitHub pages, the .io, that works.
Okay.
It's when students send me just purely a they'll actually attach the HTML or the JavaScript, and I can look at it and say, well, yeah, it looks okay. I don't want to download it to my server and test it out. You need to be able to click on something, and then I'll take a look at it. I will frequently right-click and inspect it, but I want to see something working. I want to see that it executes.
Okay, so then another question on the code is, I've tried to reread, and some of it said it's not a programming class, but at the same time you said, wow me with a program, don't just copy it from W3 Schools, but what does that mean? Can we use other people's code? Do we have to write from scratch? I mean, does it have to be super technical?
I have not written a program from scratch for about 30 years. So, but I want you to start with, I'm happy for you to start with somebody else's code, but you have to make it your own. You need to add to it, expand upon it. The W3 Schools examples, I've seen those. So when they get started, I go, yeah, I've seen, if you can move a block around the screen, that doesn't show me that you can do animations. So I want you to add to it.
So as long as we adapt it, we're pretty good then. We just have to provide you with something that we can.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
The examples that you find on W3 Schools, they do one thing. I want you to be able to put together a combination and demonstrate that you know how to, it's like one music note on a piano. I want you to be able to play chords and entire thing. And then that'll get you to basic and to working for your code reviews. To get to a skilled level, you will need to combine topics together, like AJAX with JSON with local storage.
Okay, that brings up a question then. In the reporting for last week, it said, have you met with your instructor in the past 2 weeks? But we didn't even start until week 3, technically. Right? So, but in my case, I got docked 1 point. But if I turn in, let's say next week, and I cover 4 different topics, does that suffice? I mean, how do we work that? Because, I mean, some things are super simple.
I don't like that question at all, because it's written more for the on-campus students.
Okay.
And I do not, I've got 50 students, and I do not want to have contact with all 50 of you.
Okay. Well, so you'll take care of that change then.
So in that, I don't have any control over. So I would say if you are meeting with your team each week, if you read my emails, we will count that, and I will start putting things in my email that says, just in the middle of a paragraph, it's going to say, respond to this email and tell Brother James what your favorite number is. And that way I've seen that, you've read through you're reading what I give you.
Okay.
So,
yep. Okay, good. Okay, that helps a lot. Perfect.
So, and I'll explain that this week, because I know that's a pain, because you guys want to be honest, and you think, I haven't talked to Brother James. And so you think, all right, I'm going to be honest, and I'll lose a point, even though what opportunity did I have?
Right. Okay. That's a great answer. Thank you.
Okay.
I think, does anybody else have any questions? I think I got most of mine I think, taken
that was
care of
great.
for the most part.
Yeah, no, I think that helps.
Okay. All right. Turning some code in, start sending some examples. And also, when I comment on your code, that's part of our conversation. I always will give you some feedback. Sometimes it's just a thumbs up smiley face. I do.
Okay.
But if you're at the skill level, then I just say, hey, that's great, you're good. But if you're at the working level, I'll say, this is what you need to add to it to get it up to skilled.
Okay.
And mostly that is bringing multiple topics together.
Okay. So, and also in regards to these presentations, what I did at this point, is that good, or do we need more? I mean, we've been doing meeting every week and teaching.
Those contribute to your professionalism points. And around week 8, 9, or 10, I'll start talking more about that, where I want you to put together some document. I did teaching on these 3-4 different times, and I helped out with my team members on these topics when they got stumped. So you'll put that together for professionalism. For the code topics, they stand on their own.
Okay.
You need to do something. You personally will do something with each one of the topics.
Okay. Great. Perfect.
Okay.
Is it possible to get more than a basic skill level on a first submission?
Absolutely.
Or will it always start at basic?
No. You can get all the way up to skilled on your first submission. If you're comfortable, like for JavaScript, I don't hold the bar terribly high on JavaScript. If you show me, in that you've got some JavaScript code in there, you're doing loops and you're creating an associative array, you've got some conditional code in there, you're using functions. Anymore, if I see that you are comfortable with JavaScript, I often will go ahead and just give you skills at that point, because you're going to use JavaScript in everything else in the class. So I need to get that one out of the way so you can concentrate on the other. So if you give me some really good examples on JavaScript, you'll probably get skill.
I see.
Cool.
Thank you, Mike.
Go ahead.
I took CIT 360, and we could not get beyond basic until week 10. We had to get basic on all the topics first. So yeah, it's a little different in this one, even though it's kind of the same type of grading. But
no, if you know your stuff, I was grading somebody's first assignment. I really don't like getting a submission with 6 or 8 things, which I did. Somebody sent in that this week, because it's so much I can get lost in what I'm looking at. But I appreciate the fact that somebody knows their stuff, and they might as well turn it in and say, yes, I can do local storage and I can use AJAX, and here's a really nice example. So no, if you're good, you're good. I want to grade as little as possible. So if you've got something good, turn it in. I'll mark it as skilled, and you can then go concentrate on CSS animations, which can be a handful, or DOM.
Okay, great.
awesome, thank you.
All right, who wants to present next? Eric, you want to go, or you want me to go?
All right.
I can go real quick.
Thanks for letting me interrupt you guys.
No
Yeah,
problem.
thanks,
Thank you,
Yeah,
James.
thanks, Brother James.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Yeah, mine's pretty
Oh.
simple, and it piggybacks off of what Marco presented on.
All right, cool.
Pretty well.
You go ahead, and then I'll go last.
Okay. Sorry. It's just a recording of me crying in the background. Don't worry about it. Okay, so mine's super simple. I have my video off because I have my computer's, the Wi-Fi card isn't that great. So when I can, I try to limit that so that it just saves bandwidth and stuff. But Stringy here. So I'm doing AJAX. Really, I just wanted to focus on asynchronous AJAX. Is everybody, like, how familiar is everybody with AJAX, and does everybody kind of understand what it is?
I'm not really
very familiar.
Okay, well, so I'm not very familiar with it either, so I hope that this makes sense. But basically, AJAX lets like a web page communicate with data on a server without refreshing the page, that's how like Google, like when you start typing, how it automatically has like suggestions based on what you're typing. It's using AJAX because it's not refreshing the page. It's just kind of loading data into the page that you're already in without having to do a separate
Okay.
I don't know, request isn't the right word, but because it's AJAX does requests, but it does it kind of behind the scenes. So it makes it's super handy because otherwise, if you wanted to request data from a database, usually you'd have to refresh the whole page and then it would load into the new page that you refreshed. And I'm just showing how to do it with JSON real quick. And I sent a file over in our email that has this index.html and then this JSON file with just some basic data in it as well. But so anytime you want to open or access a JSON file, you use it's in JavaScript, but it's called, I guess the process is called AJAX, but it's all in vanilla JavaScript. So I made a function that does this where it has this. So you open it by declaring a new XML HTTP request object. And then I stored that in a variable so that I can just access it easier. And this object has this property on ready state change, which you just set so that it knows when the database is open, basically, and can communicate with your web page behind the scenes. And so I'm just going to run this real quick to show. Does anybody have any questions so far? I know I've just been kind of throwing a lot of stuff out there.
Say again how it interacts. How does it interact with the web page? Is it just so you don't have to refresh? Like it doesn't have to call back to the server? Is that specifically?
Yeah, so it doesn't. So it's like it's behind the scenes. So it's using AJAX stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So XML is how data is sent, and so I'm struggling because I don't really understand it. So if anybody understands it better, feel free to pipe in. But from what I understand, with XML, it's how it sends the background data, and you can send that now using JSON, and it's a much more efficient way. So having this XML HTTP request as an object basically just opens the line of communication through XML in the background.
Okay.
Yeah. So Eric, I think you gave like a pretty good example earlier when you're typing into Google. So if you think about this, sorry, I'm not trying to like hijack your presentation or anything.
No, please do. Yeah, please do.
If you're typing in, a search bar on Google, on that input element in HTML, you would have like an I don't know what it's called, but on text changed or something like that. And that would essentially call a JavaScript function for every key that was pressed, right? And so that JavaScript function would then spin up a new HTTP request. And instead of, you see here, he has http.open get data.json. He's getting just a local JSON file that he has on his computer. But instead of that, in this case of Google, it would say like HTTPS google.com/query, and then it would pass in whatever was typed into the search bar. And then Google would receive that on their server, and then they would go and do whatever magic they do, pull from their database, whatever, and they would send you back a JSON response and say, okay, based on that query that you just gave us, or that text string that you just threw at us, here's the JSON, here's like the top results. And then you can then, on that response in here, inside this function that he has, you would take that response, parse the JSON, and then you would manipulate the DOM to show those results right there. And you can do that whole thing without ever refreshing the page.
That actually makes a lot of sense right there. Okay.
Thank you so much for explaining that.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So in this basic format of like with the XML HTTP request, I just copied that from W3 Schools. So this is how you open it, I guess, open the communication in the background. Is that right?
Yeah, nope, yep, that's right.
So really,
Okay.
the cool thing about that then is it's not, because it doesn't have to refresh, and it is you pulling just a data file, it's all local memory, right? So then you don't have bandwidth lagging because it's already localized versus back and forth, correct? Is that the right way to think too?
Well, I mean, it does use bandwidth because you're sending off like a request to the server. It's just happening in the background. So as far as like your browser looks, you wouldn't really tell that it was using any bandwidth, but it would be. I mean, it would be in the background.
Yeah, sometimes if the query takes a long time, it would take maybe a couple seconds to come back. Like on your web page, you wouldn't see anything being populated for a couple of seconds, but then it would finally pop up. So I guess there would be, a little bit of bandwidth, but there's a project I was working on at work, and I don't know anything about AJAX, so don't think anything. But there were some database queries, and we're trying to populate a list of assets, and sometimes the list was really long, and it wouldn't come back with the results for several seconds, maybe for a minute, but it would. And that's cool. Yeah, we didn't have to refresh the page or anything. We just come back and just populate the table. At first, you're wondering kind of like, well, what's going on? But then it finally happens.
So here's just an example if it ever loads. Man, Mike, I need to get a Mac like you. This computer is just not doing it.
You should.
But oops. Should load. So this is just an example to kind of illustrate. So here, this is when I click this, it's doing, that's what's firing off this whole thing. So the function that button is calling is basically everything in here. And so what it's going to do is it's going to access this JSON file, and it's going to loop through and list everybody's name that's in the JSON file. And that's done here with the for loop right there. So it's really basic, but that you have to, and just a note too, in order to access the JSON object, you have to, so here I have the response of, so let me back up just a little bit. So this xHTTP.response text is basically everything that is in this data, this JSON file. So it'll spit out everything. So including people, it'll look just like this. There won't be any format to it. And that is what this is, xHTTP.response text. In order for the browser or for you to be able to use it, you have to parse it using the JSON.parse function. And then storing that in a variable, like I did here, response, allows you to then access the individual parts of the object. So Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're just humoring me, but so in order to access that, you have to like really go through and label everything correctly. But then you just click on it, and so it's going to change this. And it did that without having to refresh the page. So there's that.
That's Micah clapping. That's good.
Yeah, that was me clapping.
Hey, thanks, man. Thanks, Micah.
There you go.
I'm here. I'll clap.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks. So any questions?
Good job. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation.
All right. Am I next?
Yeah, whenever you want.
Okay. Here goes nothing. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you still see it?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. Giving you guys a sneak peek. So feel free to ask any questions along the way. Stop me whenever if you don't understand something or want more clarification on something. But I'll just go through this PowerPoint and then I'll show a little bit of code that actually uses this stuff. So I'm talking about local storage. So this is the storage API that's on your window object. It's going to be on any HTML page. You're just going to have a window object that's just there, and so it has a storage object on it, and it has two types of storage. It's got local storage as well as something called session storage. Session storage, we won't actually learn about that this semester, I don't think, but it's a lot like local storage, except it has the data will die when the page dies. So whenever you close the page, everything that was stored in the session data will be gone. But so we're going to be focusing more on local storage, and so just kind of an overview on that. The storage object can be used to store just any type. It's basically a key value store. So it can be used to store simple data like strings, Booleans, integers, but it can also be used to store arrays and associative arrays and objects. And local storage versus session storage, local storage will stay there forever until you were to clear your cache on your browser. So a potential error you can get is users can actually turn this off. They can, let me actually show you, they can actually turn off local storage on their browser, and Safari 11 actually has it turned off by default, which is kind of interesting. But if you want to turn it off, you can see right here, disable local file restrictions. And so that actually makes it so that none of this local storage stuff will even work. But luckily, your Google Chrome and Firefox and everything don't have those disabled, so you can pretty much use it everywhere. So, but that's one potential error. They could possibly have that turned off, and then that will cause a security error. So like I mentioned earlier, local storage is a key value store, kind of like...
You're not sharing your screen anymore, by the way. I don't know if you're wanting
Oh, I'm not?
No.
Not since you said, let me show you.
Oh, man. Can you see it now?
Yes.
So you didn't even get to see any of that?
No.
Didn't see the Safari 11, no. No, we saw the first presentation, but...
Okay, can you see that? You can see where this says disable local file restrictions.
Right.
All right.
So that actually and I'll show you a demonstration of what that does later. But All right, so like Marco talked about, how JSON is, a key value data type, I guess. Local storage is a key value store. So it really can only store strings, and the strings are stored under a unique identifier. It's just called, it's just called name. So how you use it is super easy. Just in your JavaScript, you'd call local storage set item, and then you would pass it a name and then a value. So an example of that, you could say local storage.set item name, and then you could pass it your name. And so that's going to store Micah Wilson under the name ID in your local storage. And then how you would be able to retrieve from local storage is you can do local storage.getItem and pass it name, or you can just do local storage.name, kind of similar to how you would get anything off of any object in JavaScript. So because you can only store strings with local storage, if you ever have a data type that's not a string, what you need to do is stringify it, and you need to save it as a JSON string. That way you can store, different types of arrays or objects, because it'll just store as a string. So here's an example of that. I have my variable numbers, which is just a list 1 to 5, and I just call local storage set item numbers, and instead of just passing it numbers, it wants a string, so I have to call JSON stringify on that first. And then to get it back out, I just go numbers equals JSON.parse, and then I do my local storage get item numbers. Clean up. So the way you can delete from local storage is you can call local storage.clear, which will remove everything from local storage, every key value pair, or you can call remove item on a specific key. So I could do local storage.remove item name, and then that would remove the name Micah Wilson that we had previously put in there. The last kind of method on local storage is called key. So you can do local storage.key and pass it an index. So you could say, if we only had one item in our local storage and it was name and the value was Micah Wilson, you could say local storage.key and pass it 0, and it would tell you, it would return name. I don't really know why anyone would use this, because usually when you're dealing with local storage, you kind of know what you're looking for because you put it there. But I'm sure there's some practical case for it that
maybe it's just to dump whatever is in local storage. Maybe you don't know what's in there. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure that's possible. You don't actually know what's in there, so that you can kind of poke around and see, or it might be good for debugging. Here's my sources, kind of where I got that stuff from. So now we'll move on to the code. Let's make sure you guys can still see my screen.
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to show you 3 different examples with 3 different web pages. Let me go ahead and pop these open. I got kind of stuff all over. Okay, so here's my first one. Here's my first use case. Say you have a basic login page and you want to persist the username. So you want the username to stay there between sessions. So let's just go in here and we're going to say I'm going to log in. This won't actually do anything, but behind the scenes, I hit login. And so what that does is it goes local storage set item username to whatever was in my username input. And then when I refresh this page, instead of clearing both values, I guess you can't really see that. This is a placeholder, but it kept my username there. And that's because I have a function on load. So when the page loads, it calls load username. And what that does is it goes, okay, local storage, get me my username. I check if it's not null, and if it's not null, then I just populate the username field. So that might be a good use case for something like this. You wouldn't want to store the password here because this is like publicly accessible to anyone. So I can go in here and do inspect, and I can go to application and I can view the local storage. So any of you guys can go to any page and you can see what that page is using in local storage. So right here you can see my username and my value is Micah W. So we can go to Google and we can actually check out theirs, what they're using local storage for. It's probably not going to really mean anything. But here you can kind of see all of their things. And most of it's meaningless, but you can see all different types. You can see here's a string. Here's what looks like a JSON object right here. Here's a Boolean. Here's an array. So you can kind of see all different types that Google uses. And they probably named this all weird because they don't actually want you to know what it is. Anyway, so that's basically how you would store a simple string. My next two examples aren't really practical, but here would be how you would save like a list. My example two, you can see I just quickly get whatever's in the input field. I split it by a comma and a space, which will give me an array. And then I just set item, but because it's an array, I gotta stringify it in JSON first. And then you can see it right there. So let me show you how this works. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to save it. And let me open up here. You guys can see this. Now you can see my numbers, and you can see it's right there saved. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it's and you can see it's an array. And then I can just tap load, and you can see it loaded in my list, which is in this function. Basically did exactly the same thing as I showed in example 1. So example 3 is how you would store, an associative array or an object. I mean, essentially in JavaScript they're the same thing, but here's an example. You can see I have my object right here of user. It's got a username, age, classes, and if I'm married or not. And so in this case, it's just the same thing. In order to store it there, you have to call JSON Stringify. And then to load it, you would call JSON Parse. And then you can see that. It's not cool. I just call save and then load. I pop up an alert that shows this is what I had saved. And so it was able to load that. So, I mean, practical uses, I guess you could use this. Well, I mean, I think the first example I gave is kind of probably the best use case, if you wanted to keep things persistent across web page loads, or if they closed the browser and reopened it, you wanted to keep it there. That would be a good use case for local storage. I think the big thing to remember is, don't store anything sensitive in local storage like passwords or anything. You wouldn't want to do that because anyone could see them. So that's kind of it for my presentation.
Nice. Good job.
Do you guys have questions or anything?
Yeah, I got a couple questions. So
Yeah,
like so I noticed that your local storage is populated with all 3 examples. Well, we haven't checked for the last one, but I'm guessing they're all there.
Yeah,
but
yeah, they will be.
So it's stored by what? Is it by domain or? I don't know.
Yeah. So it's going to be stored by domain. So which is kind of nice, because if you wanted to store something on one page, that would just be there. If you went to a new page, it's going to be there. And so since mine is just kind of my local files, it's going to have everything across all 3 files. So yeah, that's a good question.
Another question: why do you have to stringify? Like, could you just format it? I mean, it has to be stringified.
Yeah. So I can show you. Oh yeah, the API takes a string, so you have to pass it you know, two
Okay.
strings. So that's kind of why. So here, maybe
Okay.
I can show you. Let's go to browser local storage dot set item. So you can see right there, this function only will take a string name and a string value. So if you tried to send it,
Hmm.
I don't know what it'll do, but I'm assuming. Oh, this isn't a very good use case, but I'm assuming that it'll throw an error.
And then when you load the data, does it loads as a string? You can't have it load as an array.
Right. So it would load as a string. So in that case, what you just need to call JSON parse on it, and it'll parse it out to an array.
Okay.
So yeah, it's kind of limited. I mean, I don't think it's the best way to, you know, store things, but it is probably the easiest way, you know, to store things.
Yeah.
And so it's good if you just need to do something.
Like
You know,
for
quick.
the GitHub pages, I guess. Well, I'm gonna use GitHub pages, but I guess you can't really store or create new files or store attachments or anything because of the way it's set up. So I guess local storage is a way to store things or data.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so in this case, we wouldn't have like a server to really work with for this class. And so local storage is probably, you know, one of the only ways you can store things. I mean, other ways you would store is you'd send it off to a server and they would store it in, you know, a real database and send it back to you when you need it. But
That's cool.
Micah, do you
if
know
you
how that
wanna,
differs from like a cookie?
not well, not really. I know they're different. I did kind of look that up when I was preparing this, but I can't really remember what the difference between this and a cookie is. So
Okay, no worries.
sorry, I can't really answer that.
It's okay. You pretty much answered all the questions everybody had on my presentation, so I think you're good.
Okay, I do remember
So-
what the difference between cookies are. So cookies are automatically sent back to the server. Local storage is only viewable to you. You know, it's stored on your local browser, and that's it. So cookies potentially, you know, the server can see what's stored in your cookies, but then also they open you up to different kinds of attacks because other people can get you, you know, can get access to your cookies as well. That's what I remember reading, but I'm sure it's more complicated than that.
Always is, isn't it?
Yep.
So if you disable on Safari, if you disable, well, I guess it already comes with disabled local storage. But let's say you enable it, and then do you know if
Yeah,
it empties your local storage if you disable it, or will it keep it for later?
yeah. So
I guess I
here,
could.
yeah. So here, can you still see my page?
Yeah.
Okay. So here, I'll show you in Safari. You can see I hit refresh. You know, my username's still there, and you can see it here. Storage. You see my username, but you know, as soon as I turn this off and refresh it, I don't have anything in my local storage, and it throws this error, security error. The operation is insecure. So I know Apple, they focus a lot on security and things like that. So this is probably just one of their attempts to, you know, mitigate any risks.
Yes. Another attempt at more control.
Right. But I mean, if you use it, I mean, if you use the API right, I don't think there's any risk. I think it's people who don't really understand it. And so they're storing passwords in there and other things. And so this is just probably Apple's attempt with Safari to, you keep their users from being vulnerable to things like that.
And what kind of editor are you using? I think
That's
Eric
Sublime.
one too.
Actually, I use Atom.
Oh, Adam.
Sublime's pretty good. But Atom's made by GitHub, so that's kind of why I like them, and it's completely free.
Atom, ADAM.
ATOM.
Oh.
So yeah, so it's made by GitHub and it's completely free. Sublime, they have a free version, but if you want all the cool stuff, it costs money. But Atom, they have all the cool stuff for free. And
that's what that guy on the coding train uses. He talks about it all the time.
He uses Atom?
Atom.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, I don't normally code in a text editor. I actually use Xcode for most things I do, but when I do use a text editor, Atom's pretty good. They have I can show you guys. I know some of you guys probably
what's the differences in Xcode? Is it just language or is it just preference?
So yeah, Xcode's an IDE. So I do like iOS applications. That's like what I do for work and stuff. So the difference between that is it will actually like compile the code and run it. Text editors won't actually compile the code, but cool thing with Atom is you can install different packages. It's like open source, so you can see my packages I've installed. So I have one package that'll like auto close my HTML tags, which is just something that's like kind of nice, and like all kinds of autocomplete for different languages. And this one's file icons. It gives all the icons a pretty logo, or all the files a pretty logo. Different language support, so you can just kind of search for stuff. There's also one library I have. I can't remember how to use it, but it'll like split the pane and it'll run your HTML in like the pane right next to you, so you don't have to go and open it in a browser. It'll just display it, while you're typing. I don't remember how to use it, but I did have it at one point.
Cool.
Yeah. Any other questions or?
So you're the go-to guy.
Well, I don't know about that. Like I don't know that much about web development. I mean, I've been doing software development since pretty young. I started really doing it in 2010, and then I've been doing it like professionally for the last 3 years. But like I haven't really done much web development. Like I said, mostly I do iOS, and I built our company's Android app as well originally, but
is that the Skip?
Yeah. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I downloaded it.
Yeah. So
a while ago.
Do you have an iPhone or?
No, I have Android.
Yeah, so I built the original Android app, and then I made sure we brought on an Android developer because I didn't really enjoy it that much. But
what was it called again?
It's called Skip. It's a mobile checkout app. So we integrate with grocery stores, and we let you go into the grocery store and basically puts kind of the self-checkout machine on your phone, so you can scan your groceries while you shop, and then pay for them on your phone, so you don't have to wait in line.
Oh, okay, cool.
How do they know if you've paid before you exit the store?
Yeah, so you have to. There's like a skip lane at the store that you have to exit through, and sometimes they'll do like a quick spot check. They'll just scan, a few of your items randomly. And if your basket's small enough, they can just. So there's also an app that the stores have. They can see everyone that's shopping, and so they can look at your basket, as you exit through the skip lane, and kind of just verify real quick.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. It's
I think you just
he exited.
I'm gonna stop recording and